Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The war in Ukraine or the Russian invasion of Ukraine has just completed its 1,000 days, 1,000 days, and almost perfectly timed with this, some really important developments with deep strategic significance have taken place. These could alter the course of the war and also the course of history one way or the other. Now, do big powers time these things with anniversaries, first anniversary, second anniversary, 1,000th day, 100th day? I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, because timing also is linked to Donald Trump's taking over, because it's almost 2 months from today. In fact, a day less than 2 months from today, that Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the next president, 47th president, and he has already said he has a pre-declared campaign promise of taking a radically different view on the war on Ukraine than Biden administration has taken, or than what NATO has taken. So that itself adds a sense of urgency on both sides. On the side of Russia, because they want to capture as much territory as possible now, because they would imagine that the Ukrainian forces' morale will keep on falling because they know that Trump is coming and Trump has a pre-stated position. At the same time, Ukrainians will be desperate to try and prevent any more territory loss, or maybe take some, if any such possibility exists, but also for NATO and Biden administration to increase the stakes to such a level that Trump finds it difficult to make a quick turnaround from that. That is how, on the 1,000th day of this war, Biden administration authorized the Ukrainians to use their ATACMS. ATACMS it sounds very fancy, but basically army tactical missiles, right? It's a armed forces, military industrial complex. They like to give sexy names to all their weapon systems. ATACMS are not even some ultra-modern latest systems. They were used in 1991, tested even before that, used in 1991 in the first Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. Not that many, maybe some 40, 50 were fired. In the next Iraq war, that is Operation Iraqi Freedom, in that one, more than 400 were fired. I think 450 were fired. So they've been around for more than 3 decades. They are also specified for different ranges. What's the difference now? Ukrainians have also had ATACMS for quite some time, and they've been using them. In fact, significantly, they've used them in the Russian air bases at Crimea and around Crimea. Also, many other Russian strongholds in the Donetsk region. What is the difference? The difference is that all these areas where the Ukrainians were using ATACMS so far, these are all part of Ukrainian territory. Although Russians, after capturing these, have quote-unquote annexed these. They may not get much recognition for this annexation from anybody barring some pals like Belarus or maybe North Korea. But the fact is that they have annexed these. So Russians can see these, if they so wish, as Russian territories, but Ukrainians using these weapons in these territories is like using it in their own territories. Now the Americans have said that Ukrainians have used these weapons inside Russian territory, inside original Russian territory, not what they've annexed from Ukraine in the Donetsk region. And they can go up to 300 kilometers. That's the range of the ATACMS. That is the final range of the ATACMS. So they can go there. So the first attacks have now been carried out in a place called Karachev in Bryansk Oblast. Oblast is like a district or a small state. That is how these are defined in the Russian region. And this is an attack on the 67th Main Military and Artillery Directorate. or GRAU, which must be the acronym for the Russian equivalent, and on an arsenal that they were maintaining. This is the arsenal of the 1046th Logistics Support Center, which is a part of the 67th Main Military and Artillery Directorate. Now we have to see on the map where Bryansk is and where Karachev is. Basically, if you look at Bryansk, you know that generally this is the area abutting the Kursk region. That is the area where Ukraine carried out this very audacious incursion into Russia and captured a bunch of territory. They captured a bunch of territory. It looks like in counterattacks now, Russians have recaptured about a half of it. This is an operation which has been described by many experts, notably by Dr. Marina Miron, and I see that story in the BBC. She's an expert at King's College London, who's noted it for its tactical brilliance. At the same time, she says it might become a strategic catastrophe because some of Ukraine's best forces have been employed in this operation, and they are now fighting a defensive battle to hang on to territories they had captured. And the Russians have brought in about 15,000 troops with a lot of armor and other resources. And this is where the Russians have brought in 10,000 North Korean troops as well. And chances are that they might be bringing in more North Korean troops. Now, the American clearance to the Ukrainians to use these ATACMS deep inside Russian territory is also geographically limited. They can't use them across their entire frontier with the Russians. They can only use them in the frontier abutting the Kursk region. So it's as if you draw lines on the map and say you've got this weapon system, you can cross this line, but only within this area. So Russians also know where ATACMS will be used. So they can also employ their air defenses concentratedly in that area. That's why the first strike by ATACMS, 6 missiles that Ukraine fired, although Ukraine doesn't disclose what they fired, but it's generally believed that they fired 6. Russians claim that 5 were shot down by their S-400, no S-400? 5 were shot down by their S-400 and Pantsir air defense systems. 1 broke in mid-flight because it was intercepted, and pieces of that fell on the Russian installation, which caught some fire but caused no damage. So both sides will have their own claims and interpretations. However, this is a major escalation. This is a major escalation because Putin has said for a long time that if any attacks are carried out using Western weapons, using Western supplied weapons in the Russian mainland, we must understand the nuance of what he is saying. The nuance is that Ukrainians have been carrying out attacks deep inside Russian territory with long-range drones, with other cruise missiles, because Ukrainians also make the very effective Neptune cruise missile. Some attacks have been carried out as far as St. Petersburg and Moscow as well. So those are still attacks carried out by Ukraine's own resources. What the Russians have been saying is that if any Western supplied or NATO supplied resources are used in strikes against our mainland, that would amount to a much bigger escalation. So that is what has happened right now. And Russia, first of all, has sworn massive retaliation, because of which the US has closed and evacuated its embassy in Kyiv. In fact, they are talking about an imminent major air attack. Stories appeared on international news agencies that the British and the French were also doing it, but those stories have been withdrawn. However, some other countries who are members of the NATO alliance, that is Spain, Italy, Greece, they all announced temporary closures today, but Spain, Spain always goes back and forth. Spain has now come back to its embassy. So there is a lot of tension in Kyiv as well, because everybody is watching for what will Putin do in retaliation, because for him, it is a big escalation, because if these very precise and heavy-duty missiles, I will give you the specifications as we go along, if they start hitting his mainland, particularly his logistics and troop concentrations, because from what I read in the Western media, well-informed Western media, it seems that one of the targets of these ATACMS hitting inside Russian territory would be the concentrations of North Korean troops being brought in. That would also be to dissuade North Korea from sending more troops there, because how many body bags would they want to handle? Because North Korea is a closed society. You can hide casualties for some time, but what level of casualties can you hide for how long? Those questions remain. So one, Russia's massive retaliation is expected, but second, and which is more important, Russia has revised its nuclear doctrine. Now, they didn't do it overnight. They've been working at it. In September, generally the new nuclear doctrine had got approval. It's only now that Putin has signed off on it, again timed with the 1000th day of his invasion. What is the effective difference between the nuclear doctrine that existed earlier and now? These are detailed documents. You can read them. I will try and share what links I can with you. But basically, the earlier doctrine said that Russians could use nuclear weapons. First of all, in the Russian doctrine, the state does not have the authority. Obviously, Putin can change that authority any day. But in the doctrine, the state does not have the authority to use nuclear weapons preemptively. There has to be a reason for using nuclear weapons. Second, in the existing doctrine, the state would use nuclear weapons if they saw a threat to the Russian state, that Russia had an existential threat, so nuclear weapons had to be used. Now this has been modified, and I would say the escalatory ladder for a nuclear threshold, escalatory ladder for crossing the nuclear threshold has now been lowered, because the new definition is that Russia can use nuclear weapons in response to an attack from a non-nuclear state if it's backed by a nuclear weapons power. Now that would apply fully to Ukraine, because Ukraine is backed by the US and NATO, and between US and NATO there are 3 nuclear weapons powers, that is the US, France and Britain. If you make a further reading of this new nuclear doctrine, that's important, because suddenly Putin has lowered the nuclear threshold. Lowering the nuclear threshold means heightening the nuclear fears, the fears of nuclear war. So Scandinavian countries who are next door neighbors of Putin's, Russia's, that is Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they are issuing their citizens emergency kits. They are revising their emergency drills. God forbid what will happen tomorrow. Suppose the apocalypse really happens, you have to be ready. So the fear level has gone up. At the same time, a more detailed reading of the new doctrine is also important. Now, what are the other developments that might justify Russia using nuclear weapons? First, I said a non-nuclear weapon power attacking Russia if it's backed by a nuclear weapons. So that Ukraine qualifies for already. Number 2, in case of a large-scale attack with conventional missiles, drones or aircraft, this could also meet the criteria. Now, what is large scale is something that Putin could decide as it suits him. Number 3, if there is an attack on Belarus, Belarus is a strategic ally for Russia. Russia has also positioned nuclear weapons there. In fact, positioning nuclear weapons there, Putin had said that the US also positions its nuclear weapons in its NATO member states. So why can't I do something similar? So attack on Belarus or a threat to Russian sovereignty could justify the use of nuclear weapons. Then if any member of the coalition attacks Russia, coalition means NATO, it would be treated as the entire group attacking Russia. So the Polish have been saying quite aggressively and quite strongly that they are in it, they will back Ukraine. They better be, because they are next door to Ukraine and they have the experience like Ukraine of having been subjugated in the past. So they have no love lost for Russian power. But again, Putin is now saying that if any NATO member joins the fight, it will be like the entire group, the entire alliances joined the fight. To make sure that the message is not lost, the Russians have been speaking out. Dmitry Peskov, who is the Kremlin spokesperson, he has called this new nuclear doctrine, the revised nuclear doctrine, very important text. I'm quoting from him, very important text requiring deep analysis. Ukraine, as you would expect, has dismissed it as nuclear saber rattling. In fact, keep releasing the list of Putin's nuclear threats, not even beginning from the day of the invasion, but starting before the invasion, when he said that Russia is a very strong nuclear weapons power, etc., 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 and everybody should be responsible about the use of nuclear weapons. Having got here, we also have to look at what has brought us here. That is the ATACMS systems. ATACMS, as I told you, are army tactical missile systems. So there are broadly three categories of ATACMS. M39A1s, M39A1 Block 1A, most likely that's the one that Ukraine is using, but there is also M57. The basic difference is that the first two carry bomblets, that is cluster bombs, a whole bunch of bombs, highly explosive light bombs. In fact, how light? They are just over half a kilo each. But if one missile carries, say, 900 bombs, you know how much of a havoc can they cause, because these are really high explosive shells. M57 on the other hand is a single bomb system, a single bomb of 230 kg. Chances are M39A1 Block 1A, which has 300 bomblets, is being used by Ukraine right now. These can be fired from tracked vehicles or from MLRS systems, that is multiple launch rocket systems, carried by tracked vehicles which can fire and then move. So they can do a little bit of shoot and scoot. These can also be fired from wheeled vehicles like M142s, from which the Ukrainians have been operating the HIMARS systems. HIMARS system is High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. Those ones have slightly lower range. However, those systems the Ukrainians have already been using inside the Russian mainland. In fact, the Bryansk area where the ATACMS have been used right now, that area has been hit by Ukrainians' HIMARS already in the past. At the same time, a lot of the HIMARS concentration so far, HIMARS concentration has been on the southeastern side, because that is where the Ukrainians are most threatened, with their logistical hub of Pokrovsk being threatened by a grinding Russian advance. The missile itself, M39A1, weighs 1667 kg, that has 950 bomblets. And the second one, that is Block 1A, which I said is most likely the one that Ukrainians are using from my readings, that is 1318 kilograms, and that carries 300 bomblets. Each bomblet is 590 grams only, but it fully devastates. It fully devastates an area of 677 feet in diameter. In that area, if there are aircraft parked, if there are troop concentrations, if there is other ammunition parked, if it's a big ammunition dump, this can cause a real devastation. Also, it's a missile that flies fast at 3 times the speed of sound, so not that easy to catch. However, these days, anti-missile systems are getting quite smart, in some cases even smarter than missile systems. And that's why the side that uses the missiles has to use a large number of missiles, so the air defense gets overwhelmed. You will see the missiles hitting Odessa lately, also hitting Kyiv, Kharkiv. Of the 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 missiles that are launched, maybe 15 or 20 make it. The rest are shot down on the way. That's why a country using missiles now has to have a very large number. The Russians claimed last night, for example, that the Ukrainians sent a bunch of drones over Russian territory, but they shot down 44 of them. Similarly, Ukrainians claimed just yesterday that of the 210 projectiles sent toward them, their systems and also their F-16 aircraft shot down about 144 of them. But the fact is, 20 still came down and hit their target. So this missile warfare is now going on. So it's not as if just because there are ATACMS, all of them will be successful or all of them will strike their targets. A lot of them will also be intercepted. However, this will now place further strain on Russia's own air defense systems. While all this is going on, we have to also look at the big picture in the battle. So across most of the frontier, Russians have been making slow progress, still quite grinding. They followed what is called as the meat grinder method of war, so they are suffering a lot of casualties, but in the process, Ukrainian defenders are also suffering a lot of casualties, and that Ukrainians have a limitation to how many people they can bring into battle. And public opinion in Ukraine, for the first time, more than 50% public opinion according to recent surveys, is talking about the need for a ceasefire and for stopping the war. Because for how long does a country continue to fight? Every country doesn't have the spirit of a Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh. So the Russians are following that principle. In 2024 so far, in less than 11 months, they've captured 2,700 square kilometers. It's not a lot of land. 2,700 kilometers is not a lot of land. About 2/3 the area of a tiny state of Goa, for example. That's all in a year. However, this is 6 times more than what the Russians had captured in 2023, which was 465 kilometers. This data we have from the Institute of Study of War. What this means is that the pace of Russian advance has now picked up, and that's the reason that Dr. Marina Miron now fears that there are chances that on the eastern front, the Ukrainian armed forces might collapse. And collapses of armed forces are well known. In fact, in a recent off-the-cuff conversation, Indian Rahman, the chief foreign affairs commentator at Financial Times, he had given the example of First World War, that at one point the Germans broke through the adversary's defenses and had a national celebration. But within no time after that, they collapsed on the entire front. So sometimes these collapses can come dramatically without anybody knowing what's going on. And that's the fear that many experts, many backers of Ukraine have been having about Ukrainian defense forces also, where in any case morale can't be too high now with the victory of Donald Trump. Now, what will happen when the war stops? Because someday the war will stop, there will be a ceasefire and there will be negotiations. And that's where territory will be the currency. That's the reason the Ukrainians went into Kursk, because they thought they will take territory there and trade it with something on the eastern side. However, of the 1171 square kilometers that the Ukrainians had taken in Kursk, they've lost about half now. The Russians so far have captured 1,10,649 square kilometers of territory, not all of it in this war. Bulk of this territory, almost 85 to 90% of this territory, they had captured in the past, because a lot of the Donetsk region was with them. They had also raised militias with local Russian-speaking population there. Crimea had been seized by them in 2014. So a lot of this was seized in the past. To this, they've added now another 10-15% over these 2.5 years of fighting. So this territory, about 1,10,649 square kilometers, as assessed by Institute of the Study of War, looking at satellite pictures and looking at other evidence, this is, say, generally, for ease of understanding, generally the size of Telangana. That is what the Russians have with them, and that is what the Russians are going to negotiate, because as far as they are concerned, they have annexed this territory. Now, if they get the Ukrainians to trade this territory for peace, and if they get international acceptance of this will be the first time after the Second World War, after 1945, that a sovereign country would have invaded another sovereign country, captured its territory, and got a large enough section of the global community to accept that annexation. This has not happened so far. Even Israel's annexation of Golan Heights was approved by Donald Trump in his last presidency, but most of Israel's own allies and friends haven't yet done so. So this will be a big deal for Vladimir Putin. Also, it will be a very interesting precedent for nation states going forward.